November 4, 1978, East Berlin. Thomas Petrov adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and glanced down at his watch. 7 minutes until the meeting. The chill of the Berlin autumn cut through his overcoat as he made his way through Alexanderplatz, past gray-faced Germans hurrying home before dark. 6 years as a CIA case officer stationed in East Berlin had taught him to move with purpose but never hurry. Hurrying attracted attention. The facade of normalcy had become second nature to Thomas, American diplomat by day, intelligence officer by night. He believed in what he was doing, protecting the free world from Soviet expansion. That conviction had sustained him through countless cold nights conducting surveillance, through the strain it placed on his marriage, through the persistent fear of discovery. Thomas took a deliberate wrong turn down Klein-Precedentenstrasse, walking 50 meters before doubling back, a standard counter-surveillance measure. He paused at a newspaper kiosk, pretending to browse while using the reflection in the glass to scan for followers. Nothing unusual. Just the normal complement of East Germans going about their evening routines under the watchful eye of the state. At exactly 7:30 p.m., Thomas entered Café Moscow, ordered a coffee in fluent German, and took a seat with his back to the wall. 3 minutes later, a middle-aged man in a plain brown coat entered, newspaper tucked under his arm. Mikhail Baranov, KGB colonel, stationed at the Soviet embassy. They didn't acknowledge each other. Thomas opened his copy of Der Spiegel, revealing the red dot on page 17, the confirmation signal. In the restroom, Thomas entered the middle stall, retrieved the microfilm taped beneath the toilet paper dispenser, and slipped it into a hidden compartment in his belt. The operation had proceeded normally for months. Baranov provided intelligence on Soviet military capabilities. Thomas supplied payment and instructions for the next exchange. But tonight was different. As Thomas exited the cafe, the skin on the back of his neck prickled. 2 men in identical gray coats stood near the tram stop, their posture too rigid, too alert. Thomas turned and walked in the opposite direction, his pace measured despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He took a circuitous route back toward the American sector, employing every counter-surveillance technique he knew. At the corner of Friedrichstrasse, he caught a glimpse of one of the men from the cafe, now 30 meters behind him. Thomas entered a crowded department store, weaving through shoppers, exited through a side door and ducked into an alley. The safe house on Brunnenstrasse was his only option now. Thomas arrived breathing hard, knocking in the prearranged pattern. The door opened immediately. "You've been compromised," said Frank Wilson, the station chief, pulling him inside. "Baranov was picked up by the KGB 2 hours ago." Thomas's stomach dropped. "How bad?" "Bad," he talked. "They know your name, your cover, everything. The exfiltration team is on standby. You leave tonight." Thomas shook his head. "What about Julia and the kids?" "They're fine, already on their way to West Berlin. Standard diplomatic evacuation, nothing suspicious." The relief was momentary. "What about Baranov?" Wilson's expression hardened. "We don't know. Probably Lubyanka by now. There's nothing we can do for him." Thomas knew what that meant. The infamous KGB headquarters with its basement interrogation rooms. Baranov was already being broken, piece by piece. "We have a courier," Thomas said quietly. "Fredericka Novak. She doesn't know I'm CIA, but she's been passing messages for me. If they have Baranov, they'll find her too." Wilson cursed. "East German where?" "Czech. Visiting professor at Humboldt University. She has an apartment near Prenzlauer Berg. I'll send someone to warn her, but first priority is getting you out. The Stasi will be looking for you within the hour." 3 hours later, Thomas lay flat in the back of a diplomatic vehicle, hidden beneath a false floor, heart hammering as the car approached Checkpoint Charlie. The driver, a seasoned CIA officer under diplomatic cover, maintained a casual conversation with the front passenger as the East German border guards examined their documents. "Anything to declare?" asked the guard, peering into the back seat. "Just some diplomatic pouches," replied the driver, gesturing to the sealed bags visible on the seat. Thomas held his breath as footsteps circled the car. A guard tapped the trunk, then the floor directly above Thomas's head. He closed his eyes, willing himself to remain perfectly still. "Open the trunk," ordered the guard. The driver complied. Thomas heard the creak of the trunk opening, the shuffling of items, then the slam as it closed again. "Proceed," said the guard finally. The car moved forward, crossing into West Berlin. Only when they were several blocks past the checkpoint did Thomas allow himself to breathe normally again. 2 days later, in a CIA safe house in West Berlin, Thomas received the news. Fredericka Novak had been arrested by the Stasi while attempting to cross into West Berlin at the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint. The KGB had taken custody of her immediately. "She wasn't even a real agent," Thomas said, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. "Just a courier. She passed messages, didn't even know what they contained." "That won't matter to the KGB," Wilson replied. "She was connected to you, and that's enough." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. 2 assets compromised because of him, 2 lives destroyed. "I need to get her out," Thomas said. Wilson shook his head. "Impossible. She's in KGB custody, probably already in Moscow. We're pulling you back to Langley. Your cover is blown. There's nothing more you can do here." But that night Thomas couldn't sleep. Images of Fredericka, her quiet determination, her belief that she was simply helping preserve academic freedom, not spying, haunted him. She had trusted him, and he had placed her directly in the path of the KGB. 3 weeks later, at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Thomas sat in a sterile debriefing room, recounting every detail of his 6 years in East Berlin to a team of counterintelligence analysts. "And you believe Baranov was genuine?" asked the lead analyst, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. "Yes," Thomas replied. "His intelligence was solid, confirmed by other sources. He was taking enormous risks." "What was his motivation?" Thomas considered. "Initially money. Later, I think he became disillusioned with the Soviet system. He had family in the West. He wanted to eventually join." The woman nodded, making a note. "And the courier Novak?" "Ideological. She believed in academic freedom. Had family who suffered under Soviet occupation in Prague. I recruited her as a cutout only. She didn't know she was working for American intelligence." The analyst's pen stopped. "Yet you're requesting permission to mount a rescue operation for a non-essential asset." Thomas met her gaze directly. "She's facing execution because of me. Yes, I'm requesting permission." The request was denied, of course. Fredericka Novak was deemed low value, the risk of extraction too high. Thomas was reassigned to a desk job analyzing Soviet military capabilities. His field days were over. For 6 months, Thomas played by the rules, filing reports, attending meetings, trying to rebuild his life. His wife filed for divorce, unable to forgive the years of lies. His children became increasingly distant. The guilt over Baranov and Fredericka ate at him day and night. Then came the cable from Vienna station. Fredericka Novak had been identified in transit from Lubyanka to Lefortovo prison. The KGB was moving her, which meant she was still alive. Thomas requested leave, citing family matters. Instead, he flew to Vienna using a carefully constructed alias, tapping into resources he developed during his years in the field. Former assets, ex-agents who owed him favors, black market operators who could provide documentation, weapons, equipment. In a dingy Vienna apartment, Thomas met with Karl Müller, a former East German intelligence officer who had defected to the West 5 years earlier. "You're insane," Mueller said after hearing Thomas's plan. "Breaking someone out of KGB custody, it's suicide." "Not breaking her out," Thomas corrected. "Intercepting during transport, cleaner, fewer variables." Mueller shook his head. "Even if you succeed, which you won't, the CIA will disavow you. Best case, you spend the rest of your life in prison. Worst case, the KGB catches you, and you disappear into the gulag." "I'm aware of the risks," Thomas said quietly. "Will you help me or not?" Mueller studied him, then sighed. "I know someone who might be willing to provide intelligence on the transport route, but that's it. I won't be directly involved." It took 3 weeks to put the pieces together. The transport route from Moscow to Lefortovo would take Fredericka through Minsk, then to the Polish border. The vulnerability was in the handover, a brief window when the primary KGB escort would transfer custody to the prison transport team. Thomas assembled a small team. 2 former East German border guards who had defected to the West, a Hungarian doctor with contacts in the Soviet medical system, and a Polish driver familiar with the back roads near the Belarus-Poland border. None knew the full plan. Each was paid well and told only what they needed to know. On March 15, 1979, Thomas waited in a nondescript van on a rural road 30 kilometers from Minsk. Snow fell lightly, reducing visibility, a blessing and a curse. The radio crackled with the voice of his spotter. "Transport vehicle approaching checkpoint. 3-man escort, 1 prisoner. Confirmed female." Thomas's heart raced. Time to checkpoint. 15 minutes, weather slowing them down. The plan was simple but dangerous. The Hungarian doctor had arranged for a medical emergency to be called in at the checkpoint, a fake accident requiring immediate attention. When the KGB transport stopped, Thomas and his team would intercept, using the confusion and reduced visibility to their advantage. As the transport vehicle approached, Thomas could see it was a standard KGB prisoner van, unmarked but unmistakable to anyone familiar with Soviet operations. It slowed as it approached the checkpoint, exactly as expected. What wasn't expected was the second vehicle following closely behind, a GAZ-69, the standard KGB field operations vehicle. "Abort," Thomas said into the radio. "Secondary security vehicle present." But it was too late. The accident had already been staged, the checkpoint guards already responding. The transport van stopped. Thomas watched through binoculars as the KGB officers emerged, speaking with the checkpoint guards. Then the rear doors of the transport opened, and Thomas saw her for the first time in months. Fredericka Novak, thin and pale, hands cuffed, escorted by a KGB officer. Thomas made a split-second decision. New plan, move in now, use smoke for cover. His team responded instantly, launching smoke grenades toward the checkpoint. In the confusion, Thomas drove the van forward at high speed, braking hard beside the transport. The former border guards moved with military precision, neutralizing the nearest KGB officers with tranquilizer guns. Thomas reached Fredericka, who looked at him with uncomprehending eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, voice raw from disuse. "I'm getting you out," he said, cutting her restraints with a utility knife. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. Thomas helped her into the van as gunfire erupted from the second KGB vehicle. A bullet shattered the van's side mirror. Thomas pushed Fredericka down, covering her with his body as the Polish driver accelerated away from the checkpoint. For 3 days, they moved through a network of safe houses across Poland, staying one step ahead of the massive KGB manhunt. Fredericka gradually regained her strength, the hollow look in her eyes slowly replaced by cautious hope. "Why did you come for me?" she asked on the 3rd night, as they huddled in a farmhouse outside Warsaw. Your career, your life, you've risked everything. Thomas considered his answer carefully. Because it was my fault you were captured, because I used you without telling you the full truth. Fredericka studied him. I knew more than you think. I knew you weren't just a diplomat. I chose to help anyway. The revelation stunned Thomas. Then why? Because sometimes you have to stand for something, even knowing the cost, she said simply. The journey to West Germany took another week. They crossed the border using forged documents, Fredericka now disguised as a Polish agricultural worker, Thomas as her supervisor. The moment they crossed into the West, Thomas knew his career was over. The CIA would never forgive this unauthorized operation. In a safe house in Frankfurt, Thomas received the expected message: report to the nearest CIA station immediately. Unofficial channels indicated that he faced arrest for multiple violations of CIA protocols, unauthorized use of assets, and potentially treason. You should go, Fredericka told him. Explain that I forced you to help me. Say I threatened you. Thomas shook his head. No more lies, no more manipulations. I made my choice. 2 CIA officers arrived the next day. To Thomas's surprise, one was Wilson, his former station chief from Berlin. You've created quite the diplomatic incident, Petrov, Wilson said, no hint of warmth in his voice. The Soviets are claiming kidnapping. They want you handed over. Thomas nodded, resigned. I understand. I'll go quietly. Wilson glanced at Fredericka, then back to Thomas. The director wants to see you, both of you, in Washington. I don't understand, Thomas said. Neither do I, entirely, Wilson admitted. But I think it has something to do with the information Miss Novak was carrying when you extracted her. Thomas turned to Fredericka, confusion evident on his face. She met his gaze steadily. Baranov gave me something before they took him. Said if anything happened to him, I should get it to you. I memorized it, names, dates, locations. A complete list of KGB double agents within NATO. 2 months later, Thomas sat in a congressional hearing room, testifying behind closed doors about the operation. The information Fredericka had provided had led to the identification and arrest of 17 Soviet agents embedded within NATO command structures, one of the most significant counterintelligence victories of the Cold War. Thomas was not celebrated as a hero. He received a formal reprimand, was stripped of his field officer status, and reassigned to a training role at Camp Peary. The unauthorized extraction remained classified, his actions officially disavowed. Fredericka was given a new identity, relocated to Canada, and provided with a teaching position at a small university. On October 18, 1989, just weeks before the fall of the Berlin Wall, Thomas received a postcard from Toronto. No message, just a red dot in the corner, their old signal for all clear. He smiled, tucking it into his pocket. The Cold War would soon be over, but its shadows would remain in the lives destroyed, in the moral compromises made, in the quiet acts of courage that would never make the history books. Thomas had lost his career, his family, his certainty about right and wrong. But in that moment, looking at the postcard, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Some debts, he had learned, could only be paid in person. Some loyalties transcended nations and ideologies. In a war fought in shadows, he had finally stepped into the light, facing the consequences of his actions. It wasn't heroism, it was simply human.